And now the fighters are clinching at the center of the ring. LeBlanc looks seriously fatigued. He's roughhousing him tremendously in the clinches, and he looks completely frustrated by Child's tactics. And he grabs Frank Childs around the waist and whips him down. Childs is laying on the floorboards. He's out of it. He's getting up and he's dazed. He looks completely pissed off. He's up and he's chasing LeBlanc around the ring, hammering him from post to post. He's chasing him. He's got him down in the corner and he's on top of him, punching him mercifully. The police have entered the ring. It's absolute pandemonium. The crowd is going absolutely nuts. It's a bloodthirst. He's out for blood. Childs has just absolutely tried to murder LeBlanc in the corner. And the police are in the ring absolutely everywhere. It's complete chaos.
Greeting, cheers, welcome to the Historical Boxing Society podcast. As you can hear from the highlights, that was highlights I try to recreate from George LeBlanc #2 fight. Frank Childs was definitely a guy you did not want to mess around with and piss off because he had a tendency to be hyper aggressive and he had some real power to back it up, as George LeBlanc found out in the worst way. So today we're doing a boxing profile on boxer number 53, Frank Childs, born in 1867. He's known as the Crafty Texan, and he fought out of Chicago. We're going to get the preliminaries out of the way here, and we're going to start with Frank Childs' bio. Frank Childs started boxing on tour challenges at the age of 24. He had very much in common with boxers like Sam McVeigh in that he jumped off the deep end immediately, and his very first match was against a top 60 fighter in George LeBlanc. And basically tour challenges were when fighters like older version of fighters like George LeBlanc and John L. Sullivan would go from town to town, just challenging everyday people that are in this society to try and last 4 rounds with them for a purse of $25. And they just basically made their money by having these average everyday people pay the entry fee to box them, and then they beat up on them for 4 rounds and took their money. So that's how it worked on the tour challenges. And that is exactly how Frank Childs started his career. So now, Frank Childs wasted much of his prime as he was unable to find work via boxing, and he reemerged about a decade later, very much like Jersey Joe Walcott in that respect, in that he was a lot more effective past what would be his prime age. So Childs had a very difficult time trying to earn money boxing. There's actually a short little clip that I read in a newspaper where he got arrested for pawning a friend's business. Was relatively soon after a boxing match, so he burned through his money right away, and he was still didn't have enough money to really survive, and he actually even took a whole year off of boxing. And from what I could gather from reading the newspapers, he, of all the things in the world, he was on a touring show where he would play a boxer on stage during a production of some type of a theatrical show, and he didn't really act. He was just one of the extras that played a boxer that served the purpose for the show that they were doing. And I guess Frank Childs found he could make more money being an actor than he could actually being a boxer, because after he beat George LeBlanc, he had a pretty good reputation, and he's kind of actually started finding that he was having a hard time getting work because people didn't really want to take a chance on a boxer that might upset them. So in a lot of ways, he paid a dear price for beating George LeBlanc. So that is his bio. Now we're going to go on to his fighting style. That would be described as a cowboy, or a cowboy equals like a crude, tough guy, a guy that's coming straight forward without very little defensive scientific effort. That's what a cowboy fighter is. You know, the Jess Willards and the Great White Hope type of cowboy fighters. Competitive rounds fought. Frank Childs fought 137 competitive rounds. It's a fair number, certainly not as much as some of the fighters here. My score for him was 15. 15 is a pretty low score. A lot of that is based on the fact that he missed his entire youth and didn't really take advantage of a lot of that time that he could have burned earning points, and that shows in his score of 15. Now, his chief nemesis was George Byers. He fought George Byers, the middleweight, 3 times. That was his chief nemesis. They were born very close to each other. The biggest miss of his career, without a doubt, to me, the biggest miss is that he had no match with the boxer Hank Griffin, who is born 3 years after him. Boxing Rec did have a match on there. Let's see, it was in 1893 that said that they fought, but I got that match erased from Boxing Rec because I could find no evidence that it happened on newspaper searches. I looked and looked, and I certainly wanted to read about it, and they would have been matched up at a beautiful time in both of their careers in 1894, but the match I doubt ever happened. Another one of his biggest misses would be George Godfrey. Now, there is a small line in a newspaper that claims that they met in 1894, the same year as Hank Griffin. But again, just doing very newspaper searches, I cannot find that a match existed with George Godfrey, and I can't find any evidence that suggests that match actually happened. But there is a claim that it happened, so... the next we have here is the newspaper depiction of Frank Childs. The newspaper described him wild at times, taking large wind-up shots, and he had very wicked body blows, and he was a fighter that had some power to him, as Frank Childs was 5'9" and a half and about 180 pounds, so he was naturally a little bit more heavy and a little bit more powerful than a lot of welterweight / middleweights that were right around the 160-pound mark. So he usually had about 15 pounds on them, and he had a little bit more power than a middleweight. Okay, so the next group here is simulation. How did Frank Childs do in simulation? What were his wins? So this is really showing the true potential of Frank Childs, as Frank Childs probably is definitely a boxer that never met his true potential. So let's see where his true potential lies here in simulation. So he had wins over Jake Kilrain. He had win over George Byers, who he fought in real life. We know that he was capable of beating him. He had a win over George Godfrey, who's ranked considerably ahead of him here, so he had a pretty high potential there. He had a win over mysterious Billy Smith. He had a win over George Cole. He had a win over the Dixie Kid. He had a win over Jack Bonner. He fought Jack Bonner twice, and he was certainly capable of beating him. He had a win over Hugo Kelly. He had a win over Dick O'Brien. And he finally had a win over young Peter Jackson. So every one of these guys on the list are all ranked ahead of Childs here. He had his limitations in simulation. He kind of had a little bit of the Jess Willard phenomenon that Willard had in simulation, where he had a tendency to lose confidence a little bit on a losing streak in simulation, and that somewhat limited him, but obviously he still had the ability to be able to beat some very good fighters in front of him in simulation. So overall, he was pretty competitive. Okay, so our very final category we have here is boxers born around Frank Childs. Frank Childs was born July 17th, 1867, and we're going to look through the birth years master log here. So deep into the master logs, born in 1866 would be Joe Butler. 1866 would be James J. Corbett. Right after James J., the next boxer born of significance is Frank Childs. Born 1867, Frank Childs. 1868 would be the Australian Dan Creedon. 1868, Joe Choynski. 1868, Australian Jim Hall. 1869, Kid George Levine. 1869, Bobby Dobbs. 1869, Peter Maher. Finally, 1870, which would be 3 years older than Frank Childs, Hank Griffin. 1870, Tommy West. And finally, 1870, Tommy Ryan. Those are the fighters born around Frank Childs that were his peers that he should have been fighting against. So next we're going to go through Frank Childs' competitive rounds fought, and his very first match, it was the very start of his competitive rounds. So in 1892 was Frank Childs' first match. He was the age of 24, and he was fighting a very faded, much older boxer in George Leblanc. Leblanc was 39 years old and very much at the end of his career, but not the end of the end. But he was over the hill. So these are the notes for that match. George Leblanc, number 1. Okay, this happens in February 1892. George Leblanc agreed to take on all comers in 4 rounds for a purse of $25. The challenge was accepted by Childs. 175 pounds he weighed. He had the better of Leblanc throughout the match, as LeBlanc appeared out of shape and in no condition to do multiple rounds of hard fighting. And Frank Childs knocked him out in round 3, and he was instantly a very big name in the boxing community right off of the bat. You know, in his very first match, 1-0. The boxing world knew who Frank Childs was, and he was on the scene, and he meant business. So the next thing LeBlanc did was try and set himself up a rematch. So this happened in March of 1892, which is the very next month. After George LeBlanc number 1, we have George LeBlanc number 2. So in this match, he again kind of, I think, didn't train that hard. He came in at 170 pounds. George LeBlanc did. He was a bit heavy, and these are the notes for the match. In the first round, LeBlanc was sent to the boards as Childs repeatedly rushed at his man. As LeBlanc again instantly knew, oh man, this crap again. So he's chasing him around the ring. And round number two, Childs resumes his hostility at the start of the round. The Marine showed a disposition to be mean, as he constantly talked to Childs in the clinches and insulted him. And the crowd began to hiss him verbally. Childs missed a left swing, and George LeBlanc dropped him with a right swing on the jaw. This is that's how Childs would have these big wind-up shots, and LeBlanc tagged him. The colored man was up like a cat and rained blow after blow on his opponent's face and neck, staggering him all about the ring. The round closes with the men at close quarters fighting desperately. In the Marine's corner, the Marine snarled at Childs as he went back to his corner. That's George LeBlanc showing his mean disposition. The third round, LeBlanc's face began to show the punishment he had received. Childs was as fresh as ever. After a hot exchange, LeBlanc landed on Childs' neck and staggered him across the ring. As the round closed, Childs rallied and smashed the Marine with both hands repeatedly. Round 4. Both men were showing some distress after the 2 minutes of sparring back and forth. At the call of time, the fighting Marine played groggy. Round 5. Very little was done, and both men lacked steam. Childs stabs at the Marine with jabs as the round ends. Round 6. The Marine renewed his dirty tactics in the clinch and was hissed verbally by the crowd. LeBlanc lands a drive on the chin. Childs rallied and rushed the Marine and hammered him with both hands. Just before the call of time, right at the end of the round. Round 7. Childs was beating down the Marine's guard, smashing him with both hands until he tired. Both men were clinched when the call of time happened. Round 8. Childs came up strong and fresh, intending to put his man out. LeBlanc was clinching more and more to avoid punishment. Finally, seeing that he was licked, the Marine grabbed Frank Childs around the waist and threw him down and kicked him in the stomach. Childs, though severely hurt, got up. Grasping the Marine in a half Nelson wrestling hold, he suddenly jerked his opponent into the air and flung him several feet. He started chasing after his man, hitting him repeatedly until Lablance went down in the corner. At that point, Childs was on top of Lablance, hammering him with blows as they're laying down on the ground. By the time the ring was full of officers and the referee awarded Childs a win on foul. That is a win in the 8th round via DQ. The crafty Texan proved too much for the Fighting Marine. That was the headline the next day. The crafty Texan proved too much for the Fighting Marine. And that was a pretty amazing end to the fight there. As Childs got up in rage. The African was wild with rage and punished Lablance all over the ring, knocking him down, and would unquestionably have killed George if the police had not pulled him off him. Lablance would have been rough-handled had the officers not protected him. Another quote from the paper. The Negro proved himself a clever sparrer and hits like John L. Sullivan. Experts pronounce him a natural wonder. So that is a pretty amazing way to start your career. And even though Lablance was 39 years old, he was still a top 60 fighter and certainly well above the average ability of normal starting fighters. So it says his next match was April 1st, 1893, against Hank Griffin. Like I stated, that match never happened. He never fought Hank Griffin. And that would have been, I mean, right after George Lablance, that would have been the greatest timing ever. Hank Griffin and Frank Childs in a 20-round draw is what it said. And that would be just amazing if that would have happened, but it did not. So in February of 1884, that's the first time that it's noted that Childs spars with Peter Jackson. So at this point, Childs is kind of just roaming around, and he's just constantly referred to in the paper as the conqueror of Lablance, and, because he doesn't really have anything on his record besides that event. So he is just known as the conqueror of Lablance, and I guess he's kind of having going to create even a more harder time for people to want to fight him, because he spars with Peter Jackson, and so now everyone's thinking this guy's like the real deal. We don't want to take a chance against him. So June 1894, Childs dodged around the ring to escape punishment, while the crowd cheered uproariously. Those are the notes from the Peter Jackson sparring session. Childs dodged around the ring to escape punishment while the crowd cheered uproariously. Okay, so Frank Childs' next match of significance happened in June 1894. This is a few months after the sparring session with Peter Jackson that happened in February. This is in June. In June, he fights fighter Dan Creedon, and he was from Australia. And Creedon was like one of the fighters that came over during the the Australian invasion when Bob Fitzsimmons came over too, and some of the other Australian fighters at the time, like Colin Bell. They come over, and he fought Dan Creedon in June of 1894, and Frank Childs was just completely outclassed in the match. He was booed voraciously, very negatively, and he had just a end up. Basically, they called the match because it was uncompetitive. Let's see here. That's a 3-round loss because KO. I guess it's a TKO because they called the match, and this is where he was really. He was really hadn't did that many matches, so he was kind of a very crude, fighter, and Creedon just completely exposed him because he knew how to box because he was from Australia. I mean, those guys are trained in in academies, so they're very skilled at the time. So Childs just got completely schooled by Dan Creedon, and it was an uncompetitive match. So the next match of consequence is, let's see here, Joe Choynski, and that happens in November 1895. So this is deep into the next year. Childs went to earth on the boards. He got up like a man looking for solace on Queer Street. Choynski let him off the hook with a light tap, and the match was awarded to Joe Choynski as he refused to just completely clobber Frank Childs there, when he was a helpless fighter. So that would be a loss on KO on his record. That was November 1895. So his next match here is happening way later because he takes 1896 off the year. So the next match of consequences in September 1898. So we've jumped to far forward. In that match, he is taking on George Byers for the very first time. And let's see how he did here with the notes. Okay, so this is George Byers, number 1, September 1893. It results in a 20-round loss for Frank Childs. So this is a pretty interesting point now. This is the start of Childs' twilight career. Childs, during his fight with George Byers, is 31, so he's going to try and make some hay through the beginning of his 30s here, even though he really did next to nothing in his 20s. So it's going to be an interesting point to see how good Frank Childs really is. He had such a enormous reputation. He beat George LeBlanc. He was the conqueror of George LeBlanc. He was the guy who sparred with Peter Jackson. And then he got his butt kicked by two more well-known fighters. And so how good really is he? We don't know. Is he like the guy that had a tremendous potential in the beginning, or is he more the guy that was getting his butt kicked when he stepped up his level ups? So which fighter are we getting here? So this is George Byers, number 1, in September of 1898, and these are the notes. Frank Childs is age 31 at this point. Second round, Childs caught him with the left on the eye, which opened a huge gash. Byers punished Childs in the stomach at close range. In a short time, he had Childs bleeding from several cuts. The men fought like tigers, and the more punishment they received, the more they fought on. The crowd was surprised at the amount of punishment they received and were worried that the police would step in and stop the fight. Childs was walking around the ring bleeding like a stuck pig between rounds. At times, it looked like Childs was about to go out, but would recover and sail right in with both hands swinging. Towards the end, Childs tried hard to redeem the advantage in the fight, but Byers had over him, but failed. When Childs went to his corner in the last round, his face was cut in several places, and both eyes were almost closed. George Byers was pronounced the winner. The crowd roared with approval. So, in his next match back from hiatus, he again has a losing effort against George Byers. Let's see here. Frank Child's next match is the following year, 1899. He's aged 31 years old, and this is against Jack Bonner. This is the 6th-round draw. Before we get to that, March 1895, Childs beats Frank Armstrong. And he has Tom Sharkey in the corner, who agrees to meet him, Frank Childs, because he had beat Armstrong, and Armstrong was Tom Sharkey's sparring partner. So March 1895, it was going to be Tom Sharkey versus Frank Childs. Now that would have been a super dream match. That would have been super amazing. But instead, the next match he has is May 1899. He fights Jack Bonner. And let's see, this is a 6-round draw. So these are the notes. The 5th round, Childs went down from a smash by Bonner. The 6th round, Childs connects with an uppercut, and down goes Bonner. Bonner arises, and the round goes on and ends with the 6th round there. It's declared a draw. Both men went down in the fight, and it says in the newspaper that Jack Bonner had a shade the better of the fight. So Jack Bonner was a pretty tough, competitive boxer to be fighting. He was, I think of Jack Bonner as like the standard for a challenger for a title. He was always a tough out, is how I describe it. So he was a championship caliber opponent worthy, is how I describe Jack Bonner. So let's see here. And then later in 1899 is when he starts doing these fights with Klondike Hayes, who caused Jack Johnson some problems, and he's getting a win over that. So his next match, again at the age of 31, is happening in 1900 here. And this is a 6-round win over Jack Bonner. So this is a very good win for Frank Childs. As I stated, Jack Bonner was a championship caliber fighter. So he is proving here he has got the ability to hold, a potential boxing belt by beating Bonner here. This is a 6-round win, and these are the notes. The first round, Childs floors Bonner for a 9 count on a rush out, on a punch out of a clinch. So Childs kind of broke and caught him off guard there, Bonner, and dropped him, and it was maybe a cheap shot the way it sounds on the paper there. He's coming out of a clinch and hit him. So that's kind of a no-no. In the 6th round, Childs again nearly floors Bonner with an uppercut that landed squarely on the jaw. But fighting was hard at the time of the call of the round, of the last round, the 6th round. It was a hard but slow battle. Childs was tired from lack of conditioning. Childs barely survived the last round. Bonner could take tremendous punishment throughout the match. That's why I'm saying Bonner is a very high caliber fighter, because he can take he's a hard guy to get out. He's can take a lot of punishment. So that was a really solid win for for Frank Childs, and he got 3 points for that. So his next match is the George Byers number 2. That's a 6-round draw that happened, and again, that fight is pretty darn close here. This happened in March of 1900. This is the same month as a Jack Bonner fight. This is George Byers number 2. Here are the notes. George Byers is about 15 pounds less. Byers has footwork, blocking, and ducking, and was clever, is the comments on George Byers. Childs had wild swings in each of the rounds. If not for a mad rush in the last 2 rounds, matters would not have been a draw for Childs. So Byers was ahead the first 4 rounds, and then Childs tried to even things up really hard in the last 2 rounds and got a draw out of it. Byers, in the opinion of the crowd, was the better fighter. So they kind of booed the decision of a draw, and they felt that Byers should have won that, but it's declared a draw. So again, this is March of 1900. His next match is Jack Bonner again. This is Jack Bonner number 3 here. And this is a 6-round draw. And the notes are, the Summit Hill man won the early rounds, referring to Jack Bonner. Childs fought back and was worse for wear from previous events in the evening. Childs' fast work in the last round made matters fairly even. So this is again the same as the George Byers fight, where he's doing a late rally in the last 2 rounds and getting a draw out of it. So I think he's at this point fighting more frequently and getting in a little bit better shape so that he can do 6-round matches. Let's see here. So the next match is a very significant match. These are for the colored black heavyweight title, and this is with George Byers. This happens in March of 1901. This is the following year, and this is where Frank Childs makes his mark and gets a 17-round win KO over Byers, and finally gets his punishment, or his revenge for getting his eye cut early in the first match, and just doing everything he could to pull out a complete fight in that round. So he finally got his revenge on George Byers here when he doesn't get cut, and decides to exact revenge upon Byers. So these are the notes. From the 3rd round to the finish, it was all Childs. Frank Childs had Byers down 3 times total. George Byers lacked vigorness. 17 rounds of fast action ever seen. Childs was also knocked down 4 times. The bell saving him on 3 different times. In the 13th round, Childs was caught by a right-hand jolt that stretched the champion out on the boards. Only the bell saved him as he laid on the boards. Childs finished off Byers as he was having a terrible time rising from a knockdown again, and Childs finished him off and got a 17-round win KO over George Byers. I think the match was scheduled for 20 rounds, and at this point we can see clearly now that Frank Childs got himself in shape and he's able to do 17 rounds, and amazing, just absolute amazing effort to be able to get off the boards 4 times against Byers and finish him off. I mean, that's just like, that's how these fighters were made back in this era. You know, Jack Bonner, Dick O'Brien, they all got these same thing in common, as just absolute maximum stamina and ability to take punishment is just extremely high. And Childs had that too, obviously. Getting knocked down 4 times and still winning the match is a phenomenal feat. So let's see where Frank Childs goes next year. This is the following year, 1902, in February. His next match of consequence is against Denver Ed Martin. This is with Childs as the champion of the colored black heavyweight champion. And Denver Ed Martin, they finally get this match secured. This is talked about in the paper for a long time, as Denver Ed Martin was he was the sparring partner for James Jeffries. That was Jeffries' sparring partner. And so he was highly regarded, you know, and Childs finally got a match with him, and it did not go very well for Frank Childs. It was a 6-round loss. These are the notes here. Martin was superior, so superior to Childs that he made him look like a cheap 30-cent fighter. The 3rd round, Childs went down. He got up, but Martin kept him at a distance. So that is really the end of it. I mean, Denver Ed Martin just completely outclasses him in this match. You know, he's Frank Childs is a light heavyweight, and he's got no ability to take on a very good heavyweight. He's a whole class, 2 classes below him, you know. So let's see here. Frank Childs' next match is against of consequences the same year, 1902. This is in October of 1902. Denver Ed Martin was February of 1902, and this is a 3-round win TKO over Joe Walcott. These are the notes from the match. X-rays after the fight revealed that Joe Walcott had a broken arm, as he refused to continue as his arm was not functioning. He stopped in the middle of the 3rd round, went back to his corner, and sat on a stool. So they give Frank Childs a TKO. So neither one of these fighters went down during their first couple rounds, and Childs may have had a little bit of the better, but it was because Walcott was handicapped. And this match proved absolutely disastrous for Joe Walcott. This was probably his absolute worst thing that happened to him in his career, because he's right in the middle of his prime here, and he surely probably would have absolutely kicked Frank Childs' butt there. And he was scheduled like a matter of 4 weeks after this match with Frank Childs to have a match with the cruiserweight Jack Johnson, and it was going to be a Joe Walcott versus Jack Johnson bout in October of 1902, and it never happened because Walcott hurt his arm during this Childs match and was unable to fight Jack Johnson. So oddly enough, of all the absolute weird things to happen, then Frank Childs fills in for Joe Walcott because Walcott telegrams Jack Johnson that he cannot accept the fight because he's injured. So they look for a substitute, and that substitute turns out to be none other than the guy who beat Joe Walcott, and that is Frank Childs. So his next match of consequence is 1902 in October, same month as Walcott, and it's a 12-round loss, TKO to Jack Johnson. And these are the notes from the fight. Childs was the betting favorite before the match. Childs claims dislocated elbow at the end of the match. The 11th round, Childs was spitting blood and looking out of one eye for a chance that never came. The other eye was closed for the evening behind a sadly drooping curtain of banged-up black. Child's right arm was hanging limp, and Johnson noticed it and beat him around the ring until Frank Child's seconds were able to throw in the sponge and declare the match a loss. So that is Frank Child's 12-round loss via TKO. And Child's, this really was the dagger for Childs as he put the nail in the coffin for him that he was not going to be a factor at any point ever again. So at this point, Frank Childs was 35 years old, and he was facing 11 years younger was the 24-year-old Jack Johnson that just beat him up. So let's see, his next match of consequence here is Joe Choynski. He's Frank Childs is 35 years old. This happens in December of 1902. Joe Choynski, 6-round loss. This is Joe Choynski number 2 because he had already fought him earlier and got his butt kicked bad by Choynski. Childs landed a few heavy body punches that made the white man grasp. In the third round, Childs started whirlwind style after Choynski and landed body blows on old Joe, rushing Choynski to the ropes. Just before the round ends, Choynski staggers Childs with a hard left hook to the jaw. Fifth round, Childs again gets staggered by a huge blow and follows the blow with 2 lefts to the body as Choynski delivers some punishment to Childs as he staggers about the round in the 5th round. In the 6th round, the last round, he began with a clinch. Childs tried to force matters unsuccessfully. From the 3rd to the 6th were very fast rounds for bigger men. So they said it was a pretty fast pace here, and this is a 6th-round loss to Joe Choynski as he tried to atone for a slow start again and was unable to secure the draw. Instead, he gets a 6th-round loss. So, and then we have the So Frank Child's last significant moment that he has is in 1904. He's 36 years old against a 26-year-old Jack Johnson, and this is a hard L, 6-round loss, as Childs just is severely outclassed. Childs knocked down for a 9 count in the second and the third rounds, each case saved by the bell. Childs managed to last the sixth, but was in severe distress at the finish. So at this point, Frank Childs realizes he's far past his prime. He's 36 years old. It says there on Boxing Rec that he has another match in November against Denver at Martin, but there's no evidence I see that happening. This is the only match he fights for the year in the newspaper, and he just calls it a quit after that. That's the end of Child's career. So Frank Childs died on June 20th, 1936. He was 69 years old. So he got to see a lot of great boxers all the way through the Jack Dempsey era and, into the Joe Louis, the other heavyweights that came far after Frank Childs. He got to witness them and see how they did. So that was pretty cool for him to be able to live to be 69 years old. So that is my boxing profile for Frank Childs. He had a lot of strong potential, never probably realized his full potential, but nonetheless, he was a very dangerous fighter. So thanks for listening. This is the Historical Boxing Society podcast.